Next we've got pocket 8s in middle position, there's no straddle on, I raised to 15. The hijack calls, the cutoff is a scoundrel, he 3-bets a 60. I like playing 3-bet pots with pocket pairs because if we hit a set, we can often win huge pots or potentially even stack someone. I call for 45 more, this is a deep game so the price we're getting pre-flop relative to our stack depth is only a small percentage, making it even more appealing to stick around. The hijack calls as well, we're going 3 ways to the flop out of position, it comes Jack 9-8 all diamonds, we've got middle set on an extremely coordinated board. I check, just like when I used to be on dating apps and put that I was a professional poker player, no one seems to be that interested, the opponents both check back. The turn is the deuce of diamonds, putting 4 to the flush on board and downgrading the strength of our hand even more. We all check once again, so it's very unlikely anyone's holding a high diamond card. The button often won't have a set or 2 pair either after checking back the flop. The river is the 9 of clubs pairing the board and giving us a full house. Now I'm hoping someone has some kind of piece, but it's very unlikely. I put out a tiny bet of 70 to induce bluffs or get a crying call from someone who doesn't want to fold to such a small sizing. The hijack immediately folds, the cutoff isn't as quick to relinquish his hand, he looks to possibly be contemplating a raise. I'd love that because there aren't any full houses that he could credibly rep. He probably would have bet on the flop with any hand like 9-8 or better. After 30 seconds of tanking, the opponent unfortunately folds, we make a big hand in a 3-bet pot, but it doesn't seem like anyone else had anything, we win just a medium amount. We're playing 7-handed at the moment when we look down at 9-7 suited under the gun. Generally, I'd fold from this position, but I'm a little bored after being card dead for a while, and that's always a good reason to expand the range. I raised to 15. The hijack calls, the small blind calls, the big blind calls as well. We're going 4 ways to the flop. It comes 8-8-5 rainbow. We've only got a gutter with 1 over and a backdoor flush draw. Checks to me. There are a few reasons that I like this flop. We at least have a draw to what will often give us the best hand. There are a lot of cards that will help us improve on the turn, including any spade, 6-7, 9-10, or jack. But one of the main reasons I like it is because of the exact suits of the 8s that are on the board. Notice that the 8 of spades is unaccounted for, but we block combinations of 8s that our opponents might have called a pre-flop raise with, like 9-8 of spades and 8-7 of spades. Because we know that we'll be up against fewer trip combinations, I feel comfortable semi-bluffing to rep those combinations that we're blocking. I bet 20. That's too much for the hijack when there are multiple other players still involved. He folds. The small blind doesn't believe that we'll have a good hand all that often. In this case, he's correct. He calls a small bet. It's a little worrisome. The big blind folds. It's down to heads up. Remember how I said that there are a lot of cards that'll help us improve on the turn? Well, the dealer puts out the jack of spades. We pick up the straight flush draw and the double gutter. The small blind checks. Since we didn't bet very large on the flop, the small blind could have reasonably called with a variety of weaker hands that won't like seeing the jack, including lots of smaller pocket pairs, hands containing a 5, and maybe even some high card combinations. I bet 115 to put the opponent to the test. It's more than the size of the pot. We're going to find out right now whether or not the small blind has an 8. There's no immediate decision from the opponent. I'd really like it if he made life easy and just let go of whatever he's got. Life isn't always easy though. But this time it is, the opponent folds, we get our semi-bluff through without having to make a real hand. Sometimes boredom pays off. In this one we've got ace-10 of clubs in the big blind with the straddle on. Under the gun +1 limps in for 10. The button is the player from Japan. He raises to 40. He's a really nice guy who watches the vlogs and says, since I'm filming, he's willing to show what he has anytime we get into a big pot together, whether he's obligated to show or not. I call for 35 more. Under the gun +1 calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop out of position. The dealer puts out ace queen 7 with 2 hearts. We've got top pair and a backdoor straight draw with multiple opponents. It's on a board that should connect too well with us most of the time, even though it does here. I check. Under the gun +1 checks. I expect the pre-flop raiser to bet frequently because it's good for his range. Instead, he checks back, indicating that he has a hand that's too good to turn into a bluff, but not good enough to bet for value. Often, that'll be a hand like pocket kings, a weak ace, or queen jack. The turn is the 8 of spades. I check once more. If this checks through again, I'll feel comfortable betting the river for value. The opponents both check behind, so there's very little chance that anyone has us beat. The river is the 6 of diamonds. It's mostly a blank, especially since we have removal to 10-9 for the straight. I bet 100 to get calls from bluff-catching hands, like a pair of queens or worse. Under the gun +1 folds. I'm glad he didn't have pocket 6s, ace 6, or 7-6. The button can't allow us to win without giving us some resistance and some extra money. He calls, we show him that we've got what we were representing. At first, the opponent doesn't show us what he made the call with. Then he remembers that he said anytime we were in a pot together, he'd show for the vlog. He reveals that he donated to the Brad Owen Foundation with Queen 9 of clubs. He flopped middle pair and wanted to get to showdown without having to pay too much, but we got a good chunk from him. He still owes us little from when he drilled the straight against us though. The very next hand, we've got 10-9 suited with the straddle on. The cutoff raises to 30. This is the same opponent who we 3-bet last hand. He's a good young player who tells me that his first introduction to poker was from watching this channel 4 or 5 years ago when he was still in high school. Anytime I hear that kind of thing, it warms my heart. I call to destroy him. The under the gun straddler calls as well. We're going 3 ways to the flop out of position. It comes ace 8-7 with 2 spades. We smash it with the straight flush draw. I check. Under the gun checks. I'm already anticipating putting in the check raise. Then the cutoff checks back so we don't get the opportunity. The turn is the jack of clubs giving us the nuts. There's a second flush draw on the board. I bet 90 for value. Under the gun folds right away. The cutoff might have connected with the turn, or maybe he checked back the flop or pot control with an ace because he calls to see the river. The dealer puts out another 8, the flush draws miss, and so does every straight draw except 10-9, which we happen to have. I'm not very concerned about the board pairing, given that a check through on the flop, and then the opponent only called our turn bet. Our straight should be best, even though it's been slightly downgraded, and it's no longer the nuts. I go with another overbet, a 350, to hopefully make it look like we're attempting a big bluff with a missed draw after seeing the cutoff take a pretty passive line post-flop. The young player's deep in the tank, trying to piece together what we've got. He definitely doesn't want to get bluffed, and thinks that he might have a good enough hand to win. I wasn't too worried anyway, but it's becoming more and more clear that the opponent definitely doesn't have anything that he's considering raising with. After over 2 minutes of questioning all the decisions he's made in his life that led him to this point, he finally folds. I don't want to make him wait for the vlog to come out. I show him that he made the correct laydown. He tells me that he had ace-4 of spades, which had us completely crushed on the flop. It's too bad that the jack of spades didn't come out on the turn instead of the jack of clubs because we would have gotten all the chips. Still, it's lucky for us to come away with the victory. Here we've got jack 10 offsuit under the gun while we're still playing short-handed. In a full ring game, I'd fold from this position. Fewer players at the table to 3-bet us. I raise to 30. The button calls. The big blind calls with the short stack. We're going 3 ways to the flop. Comes jack 9-3 rainbow. We've got top pair. The big blind checks. Our hand is vulnerable because there are a lot of overcards that we won't want to see on future streets. I bet 50 for value and protection. The button doesn't have anything all that great. He folds. The big blind makes things difficult by putting in a check raise to 130. The opponent only has 335 behind. Jack 10 isn't that great, but I can't fold for 80 more. If we're up against a set, we're at huge trouble, but there are some bluffs the opponent can have, like straight draws, and maybe he's just doing this to see where he's at with a smaller pair or worse jack. I call, taking things one street at a time. Perhaps we'll fold if the turn is scary and we face a shove. The dealer puts out the deuce of hearts. It's a complete blank. The opponent mixed-in is a wild man. He rips it for 335. It's close to a pot-sized shove. I don't love the situation that we found ourselves in, but I'm not totally convinced that we're beat. I make the call. It's admittedly a somewhat speculative one because we could be drawing dead or slim. We're gearing up for a river, even though it may not even matter. The dealer puts out the 8 of diamonds. We don't improve, but the opponent does. He shows that he rivered the nuts with queen 10 offsuit after shoving as a semi-bluff on the turn. We made the correct call at that point, only to get punished in an all-in pot. Luckily, it wasn't for too much. Still, it's disappointing when very few pots have gone our direction. Sometimes it's just how poker goes. After playing a little while longer, I rack up without taking down any significant pots. It's been a pretty long session and a tough day at the office. At least I've seen a lot of familiar faces. I love being in this room and saying hi to viewers. As I'm walking to the cage to cash out, this guy named Nick, who's been incredibly patient the whole night, saw my Instagram story about playing a session at the lodge and wanted to come say hi. He drove in all the way from
Houston, or actually, yeah, pretty much Houston, yeah.
Sweet, dude. Thanks for coming out, man. What time is it right now? It's like 4 in the morning. Wow.
Yeah, waiting all night just to say hey, you know. But got some games in, pretty good. We're up like $300, so that's
nice. So it made the trip worth it a little bit.
Yeah, pay for gas.
Well, I appreciate Nick waiting for me to pick up before coming over to say hi. Definitely don't feel like you need to sit around until 4 in the morning to come over. Even if I'm stuck a lot, I'm always happy to have a quick conversation or take a photo with you, especially if you've gone out of your way to meet up.